Thank you. And then after the presentation, perhaps of Ms. Zhang, we can have insights from the newly appointed presidential assistant on climate change, on how we can, and those from the audience, especially Congressman Treñas, who's the chair of the Committee on Good Government in Congress, may also make use. How brief is that? A few minutes? 10 minutes? Okay, good.
Thank you, Senator Legarda. Can you hear me? No? Hello? Yeah. Magandang umaga. My name is Yan Zhang, and I'm the country sector coordinator of the Philippines for the Urban and DRM program. It is my honor to be here to present the case of the Philippines to give a little bit of the local flavor. And as Bert said, I'm quite new here, and the work has been supported by our team, and Kat is one of them. I must say, this book is a fascinating read, and it's not that common, actually, to be frank, for me to actually say that for a bank publication. I cannot speak of that for the UN agencies, but this is definitely a book that's standing out of most of the DRM publications that really serve to move the minds of people, that really sheds some light on the economics of prevention. And this is not trivial, as one of our managing directors of the bank has made her remark that for far too long, leaders are... Hello? Yeah. For too long, leaders around the world have done too little to prevent the transformation of natural hazard to unnatural disasters. And this book certainly succeeded in actually moving my minds. Let me give you a quick kind of stats and background for the Philippines. The Philippines is one of the global disaster hotspots. It ranks the number 8 among countries that are most exposed to hazards, with at least 60% of the total land areas exposed to multiple hazards. And it ranks the 11th among countries with high mortality risk, with at least 88% of total population at high mortality risk, multiple hazards. And as we just heard, and we understood also, the new administration has really put disaster risk mitigation as their top priorities. And we, a few minutes ago, heard also from Secretary Pandaraga that the ongoing PDB has actually designated specific sections on these particular issues, and it's very, very encouraging. Now let me follow the 5 key messages that Approver just presented to see what the Philippines have been doing and what are the opportunities for the country to do better. First, avoiding disastrous adverse effects are the benefits of prevention. The case for prevention is not difficult to make if you look into the following facts and figures. 85% of the GDP is located in areas at risk of natural hazards. And direct damages for the last 3 decades have been averaged at around half a percentage point to 1 percentage point of GDP. And Philippines, with at least 85, the Andoy and Pampang alone cost around 2.7% of GDP, and it increased the number of poor people by 500,000. The Philippines has developed, actually, next slide, quite an elaborate framework for risk financing. However, it doesn't add up. On average, only a quarter of the cost of damages, direct or indirect, can be covered by the variety of sources of financing. As one of the lessons learned from Andoy and Pampang, the Philippine government revised the DRM policy framework to emphasize prevention and mitigation measures rather than post-disaster response. It's definitely welcoming a move in the right direction. For example, now the local calamity funds can be used not only for ex-post responses, but also ex-ante actions such as preparedness, prevention, and risk mitigation. Second, prevention pays, but you don't always have to pay more. Here, I'd like to echo Apruva's seemingly simple but profound principles. Good prevention mechanisms, more often than not, are policies and regulations that would enable markets to work and enable institutions to be aware and ready to respond to disasters in a more timely and effective fashion. First, let the market work. And field for the individuals and firms to make sound locational choices. Here, the land use, the comprehensive land use plans and zoning are absolutely critical. And second, make the information more accessible. And as we all know, NDRMC had been leading the hazard mapping for the entire country. It's a very positive development to provide basis for other agencies and individuals to plan and to plan ahead accordingly. However, we all also understand the capacity at the local level and across different agencies are dearly needed for putting these hazard maps, once they're ready, into good use. These policy actions, oftentimes just to remove market distortions, as Approval has also just mentioned, are not really requiring much of more financings from the finance ministers. 3, targeted increase in spending. Although we don't need to spend more, we definitely need to spend wisely. The book, again, suggests 3 promising areas. Although, we need to be country-specific, but these areas actually ring true in the Philippines context. They are sort of better investments in weather forecasting and early warning system, and improving, safeguarding critical infrastructure, and protecting environmental buffers. The first one, spending improving weather forecasting actually has almost always yielded high returns. And PACASA had already established its early warning system, and recent upgrade their equipment has become actually providing more accurate and timely weather information. And dividend will be much higher if this data is much widely shared across, domestically, regionally, and internationally. And government facilities, next please, are, especially the crucial ones, are expected to play very important functions in the aftermath of disasters. Safe schools, hospitals, and critical roads infrastructure often prove to be critical in just providing the safe haven in the case of calamities. And good examples are here happening in the Philippines. For example, in the Department of Education, we learned that they have issued Safe School Building Design Standard. And in the city of Bicol, I think, they recently built also transmission towers which can withstand super typhoons. The third area, which is increase in spending that are sort of targeting also the root causes of our vulnerability. Again, for too long, poor land uses and unregulated development has put our ecosystem over the edge. And we should put our money in protecting environment buffer by reforestation, including those mangrove plantations. And these will be money well spent. And to complement this, it's important to incentivize implementation of good building practices. And in this book, there's interesting debate on the sort of the building code, and I encourage everyone to read it. It will be interesting also to reflect that in the context of Secretary Panduraga's statement on reviewing the building codes of the country. And third, no single measure is sufficient, and what we needed is a sort of a portfolio of different measures. And I think there's no need to further elaborate. It's well recognized in the country's legal framework and is well recognized in the DRM law. Finally, the future can be managed. And we all know that risks are growing and changing with rapid urbanization and changing climate. And future can be managed if we understand these trends and prepare for them. In the Philippines, right now, we have more than 60% of population already residing in the urban areas. By 2030, it is estimated that more than 80% will be living in the cities. How cities grow and how cities are managed will determine the country's vulnerability or resiliency. For next slide, please. One of the biggest challenges, or two challenges I would like to highlight in closing, is the proliferation of slums, which is the manifestation of the unmet demand of newly migrant population. And far too many cities in the Philippines have not been able to respond to the demand to provide the needed infrastructure and essential public facilities such as water, roads, sanitation, schools, and clinics. And it's already posing a very, very serious challenge to the current urbanization, and it will be remaining to be one of the most challenging tasks ahead of us to actually reduce the vulnerability of those populations living in the dangerous zones, and then at the same time making sure the cities grow in a competitive manner. Again, we have good news and we have islands of good practices, and we know examples such as this in the big city where relocation housing were provided in a much better standard. And they actually survive in the Pempong and Andoy events. And most importantly, these slum dwellers relocated from sort of danger zones, they don't necessarily pay higher rents, actually. In this case, they actually are paying much more affordable rents compared to mortgage payment, I would say. Compared to previously 1,500 pesos a month, they are now paying around 900 pesos per month. And for this, the country overall right now has about 3.6 million affordable housing gaps to be filled. And definitely bigger and bolder interventions is needed at all levels. Not only public sector, but private sectors would have a role, and of course, the civil society. The second issue that I'd like to highlight in closing is that land use planning holds the key for successful prevention. And modern land use planning actually build upon hazard risk assessment, which would serve as an important basis for the land use restrictions and transparent zoning decisions. At the national level, a national land use plan is paramount to set the environmental buffers at a larger scale to prevent further environmental degradation. At local level, LGUs, the clubs, the comprehensive land use plans, if they are done right, is crucial to help individuals and firms to make rational locational choices. And the land use planning practices in the Philippines should be taken more seriously, not just for administrative compliances. Again, I'd like to actually use one good example to look at the usage of fault lines in land use planning activities. And the engineers, the scientists would tell us that we shouldn't actually build and even up on top of the fault lines. And if there are structures, it's better to remove them, because there's no way that a human technology can prevent destructions of earthquake, in the event of earthquake, of those structures sitting on top of the fault line. And again, we have good examples from cities, LGUs, such as Makati City, which has implemented a risk-sensitive redevelopment scheme. They actually take actions to remove people away from these fault lines. I think the message here is that we have really islands of success stories here and there, and it's for us, all of us, to actually scale it up and build a sustainable practice, taking into consideration of the prevention aspect of DRM. Lastly, the World Bank has been actually working closely with the government on many fronts, and there are further opportunities for partnership, and not only for risk mitigation and reduction, but also prevention. And we have knowledge exchange on the basis of global experiences through the DRF facility in particular. And we also would have global networks of learning exchanges through the grants provided by Cities Alliance. And of course, this technical assistance capacity, we have already been providing those especially to LGUs. And we have been also looking into various of instruments of risk financing and working closely with the government. And with that, I look forward to continued collaboration with the government. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Salama. We recognize the Chairman of the Reforestation Committee in Congress, Congressman Victor Yu, and the Chairman of the Ecology Committee, Congressman Dan Fernandez, also members of Congress. Perhaps we could hear from Secretary Bebet Gozun, because these are the implications of the impacts of climate change directly on the Philippines, and perhaps Secretary Padaranga. Earlier we were talking about how we can actually do a national land use policy, take into consideration all the challenges on the ground of informal settlers in areas where they should not have their homes. So, Bebet, perhaps you can give your inputs and what advice you can give President Aquino, who is incidentally the chairman of the Climate Change Commission. I hope that we can convene the National Commission soon, as well as the LEDA. Then Secretary Padaranga.
Thank you very much, Senator. This briefing and the release of this book is really very timely. We all know that the adverse consequences of climate change are already a reality in the Philippines. It's not something that's likely to happen. We've been actually experiencing extreme increased rainfall, sea level rise is also here, and increasing temperature, as well as extreme weather. And as already pointed out, the Philippines is very vulnerable, and therefore the critical thing for us to really do is to adapt. We need to reduce the risk because there's nothing we can do about the natural disasters. And for adaptation to really work, as also pointed out, it is not the task of the Environment Ministry, for example, or just one or two sectors. It really needs it needs all different departments of government, as well as local governments and communities and the academia and media, everybody working together. It is opportune that we are in the process of finalizing the MTPDP, and that has been a mechanism by which we are now trying to integrate climate-proof the MTPDP itself. So it's not looked at as a project of the Department of Environment, but for public works, for example, what does that mean? Major infrastructure, meaning major roads and airports, should no longer be by the coastal areas, because we cannot stop the sea from rising. And yet, if you look at least those that we've seen are in the pipeline, they are still in the coastal areas. That's a guide not just to national government, but also to the local governments themselves. Another opportunity for integration is really the new law on disaster risk reduction and management, because there's also an action plan that's being developed there. What we're hoping to do is that we don't have too many plans, but that we make sure that all of these come together, and that climate change considerations in disaster are also there in that particular action plan. So hindi rin malilito yung mga tao. Don't be confused with so many plans. Even if you look at one, the substance of what's in one is also in the other. Now, right now, the Climate Change Commission is in the process of preparing the National Climate Change Action Plan. There was just a 3-day workshop recently. The sectoral working groups are now working on this. And what this is doing is to identify the short-term, medium, and long-term actions that need to be done. And these are not just programs and projects, but also policies as well. And as the Senator pointed out, one of those that has emerged as a priority recommendation in terms of policy is the People's Survival Fund. This, of course, has to still be discussed with some sectors, including Secretary Purisima, and we just agreed that we will sit down with him to discuss their concerns as far as the financial implications of that particular law is going to be. And the other thing, which was mentioned by the President himself during his first State of the Nation address, because people were saying President Noynoy did not say anything about the environment. He actually highlighted a very fundamental need for effective environmental management in this country, which was to prioritize the National Land Use Act. Do you know that up to now, as a country, we don't have a national land use policy? So how can we talk of guiding the comprehensive land use plans of government when the overall framework is not even established? Each time we encounter, when I was Secretary of the DNR, we encountered December of 2003, the tragedy in Leyte, in Panaon Island. Right after that, the National Land Use Act was certified as urgent, and it started moving, and then we forgot.
Please
so
make sure it's a priority in the LEDA.
Yes, yes.
It's pending here in the Senate. How about in the House? It's pending or passed already? But you filed your version. There's a NEDA version. I assume the NEDA version is supposed to be better than our version because they've studied it. Just for the record, that's the first bill I filed in 1998. Yeah, it's 2011, it's still pending.
Yeah, it's still pending, you see? I think generally there has not been any, there has been very limited understanding of the importance of that law.
I think our inputs here can also enhance the national land use policy, and it's good in a way that it wasn't passed in 98 during my first term because DRR and CCA perhaps were not incorporated then.
Yeah.
I hope that the NEDA version, I've not read it, Secretary, incorporates disaster resiliency in the land use plan, and if not, we can ask our friends from the UNISDR to take a peek on how to improve it. Just like the National Land Use Act, I admit we were helped a lot by the ISDR to make sure that there's disaster risk reduction because it may not be perfect the way we have it in Congress. So may we ask NEDA's help, Secretary Devin's help, so that we have also the perspective of civil society, because that is where you're coming from, as well as the ISDR also, to look at the present complexion of the national land use as it is filed so that we don't have difficulty in the amendments portion. In short, pintasan ninyo, suriin na ninyo, let's make it a perfect law because I don't think we should keep on amending every Congress.
Sure. And then ultimately, the impacts of climate change are really going to be felt locally. And the impacts are going to differ in different parts of the country. That highlights the urgency to really enable the local governments and the communities themselves to effectively deal with it and effectively adopt. And this is where I would like to add to the list of the targeted public spending that has to be done. We need to have the base maps that can guide overall planning in this country. We already have the geohazards map that Mines and Geosciences has prepared. So at least that has identified all over the country the high-risk areas. But that solution is 1:50,000. We cannot use that for detailed planning at the barangay level, which ultimately is what you need to do, because it's not the whole city, it's not the whole province, it's specific areas. And I'm very glad that I understand we had discussions way before Christmas with Secretary Butch Abad that the government realizes this and is going to be making that investment to pool all of the money that's available for mapping and come out with talking to NAMRIA, they said they'll be able to produce this in about 1.5 years, at least initially for the 20 most vulnerable countries that are already identified with the initial geohazard maps. And all of those geohazard maps should be readily available to all through the website, of course with some analysis, no? Because without that, it could also be, people could use it incorrectly. And the only other thing I wanted to mention is that in addition to weather forecasting, we also need to do more climate modeling. That's an investment in research and development that should guide the medium and the long-term planning that we need to do to be able to cope with the impacts of climate change. Because we need to, I really believe we need to strengthen the scientific basis for major decisions and policies that we have in the country, and that's a major gap that or as yung ano ngayon major gap kulang talaga, no, if we really want to be able to guide everybody who needs to do their work. And we look forward to working with your office and all the other stakeholders here to come up with all of these things that we need to do to ensure that ultimately we reduce the risk so that we safeguard lives and properties and ensure a more sustainable path to development for the country. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Bebet. Secretary Padaranga gave us his views earlier, but these are the implications. Our question is, and perhaps you should guide us, how do we actually operationalize the NETA plans and even in terms of investments, how do we make sure that these investments provide us with disaster-resilient communities?
Thank you very much, Senator. Actually, that's why the development plan is important, because after the development plan, we will have to prepare the public investment program, which is now the specification of the plan into projects. And so the principles that are found in the development plan, especially about disaster risk reduction, will also have to be included when we start looking at the plans. Among others, what was mentioned, the transportation plans, the planning for major infrastructure like schools and hospitals. Well, fortunately, Senator, you have tentatively agreed that you will put together a multi-sectoral meeting every now and then for all the different societies, institutions, sectors, including the LGUs, because a big part of it is going to be implemented through the local governments. We hope we can fit in with, we would like to make the planning process, Senator, more dynamic. So every year, we would like to undertake an annual plan update where there will be monitoring and then another look. Perhaps there can be minor adjustments, and this can be used also for making sure that the principles are being followed.
Just to perhaps let them in on what you mentioned, no? We were earlier whispering to each other that perhaps one of the output of this consultation would be the setting up of a multi-sectoral partnership to make sure that the medium-term development plan is not only climate-proof and disaster-resilient, but really would provide a sustainable development. Because we, in this room, understand each other conceptually, but how do we operationalize it? In short, tatagalogin ko, I will simplify. Paano natin ituturo sa Department of Agriculture at sa lahat ng regional director at sa lahat ng farmers and fisher folk sa baba, sa Iloilo, Zamboanga, sa Laguna, etc., sa mga naapektuhan sa Laguna de Bay na hanggang hindi pa nakakabalik sa kanilang mga lugar, ang pagbabago ng klima at ang dapat gawin. Anong klase mga binhi ang dapat itanim? Anong klase mga proyekto ang dapat ibigay ng mga kongresista at mga senador? Dapat pa farm to market road pa rin? Dapat pa ba ay irrigation facilities pa din o ibahin na natin? Ano sa DOH? Paano ba ang pagpatayo ng mga ospital? Ano ba ang pondong dapat ilagay ng mga kongresista, ng kongreso? How do we, when we say safe hospitals, let's operationalize it. Siguro po, Secretary, ay dapat natin meron tayong simpleng how-to. Pagdating sa Agriculture Department, when we say disaster resilient, climate adaptation, ano ba ito? Ito ang dapat gawin. Mr. Secretary, si Prosi, next time kasama si Prosi sa ating multisectoral, ano ba ang dapat ipahayag niya sa RDs hanggang sa mga provincial agriculturists, hanggang sa mga extension workers, na ganito dapat, dapat ang ating ginagawa. Let's say sa DepEd, ang ating modelo ng ating mga classroom ay yung mga 20-30 years ago pa rin. Sabi ni Secretary, dapat yan, bago bigyan ng proyekto, may solar panels. Dapat yan siguro yung after 1989 law na pinapatupad ng DPWH on the water catchment basins, which is not being implemented for the past 22 years, should be implemented already bago bigyan ng project. 100 million binigay ko sa lahat ng classrooms. LGUs, taga 500,000. Pero they may build it the way it was built 20 years ago. 20 years ago, hindi pa masyadong ramdam ang climate change. Iba ngayon. Kaya tama kayo, DA, DPWH, si Secretary Singson, very receptive at naintindihan niya dahil nagawa na nila sa dati sa pribadong sektor na kailangan yung flood control ay talagang magawa nila. So DPWH, DA, even DOE, our energy sector, so the climate resilient, disaster-proof, and DOH and DepEd. I'm glad NEDA is there. So yes, I am willing to host and help convene. You are the experts, we're just the advocates. The problem is we do the budget, so we make sure when we do the budget, it is according to what NEDA thinks is the right thing to do. I'm glad Secretary Bert is there, so we will work together, and I hope the UNISDR can help us also in doing this development planning. Yes. Jerry, perhaps you can moderate some, maybe 3 questions from the floor, whether from the media, the NGOs, or the congressman. They can ask the World Bank directly on financing, on how the city of Iloilo can benefit yung bahay ni Congressman when he was mayor, nung panahon ng Frank, hindi ba? Ikwento mo, na baha, ang pagkabaha niya, hindi simpleng baha, kundi putik. But with that question, I'll have a 1-minute break. I just have 1 minute. Jerry, maybe you can ask one question, then I'll be back on this.
So with that message from the Senator, I think we can open the floor. We can take 3 questions. Please state your name and your affiliation and to whom you would like to ask the question. Yes, ma'am.
Good morning.
Does it work?
Good morning. I'd like to wear my hat as representative of the Management Association of the Philippines. We have mentioned government officials being present here in NGO. I come from the business sector as MAP rep. I'd like to share what we are doing at MAP. We are forming task forces to match the different departments of government. And so on climate change, we will have one on climate change and disaster preparedness, which I will be heading. And what we'd like to promote is what we call integrated communication, assessment, and management. What the Senator just said is about communication. I think we have the institutions, we have PCSD, but what we lack is a good communication program that also includes the availability of information that you mentioned. So I will propose to the World Bank that when we do this, not only the 2Ps taking over the, what was that, 3 Rs, but also having an integrated, we call it in acronym IRCAM, Integrated Risk Communication, Assessment, and Management. Now, the assessment, I think, is very important. We found out that there are many efforts to produce risk profiles of communities. We have, as I discovered last night, one group from LaSalle doing a community-based monitoring system. And then we have the National Disaster, which has a difficult acronym and a long name, also doing something. And we have a Spain-funded. All of these efforts are going on. But I think we have to pull them together now, and we will be happy to put effort on this to help. The measure mentioned by Secretary Purisima, who is also an active member of MAP, to have an insurance, I think should be preceded by a good assessment program. Because unless we do that, we will be billed high rates of insurance by the reinsurers abroad, which is happening now. We pay one of the highest insurance premiums in the world because the insurers do not trust us. We do not have a good assessment program to present to them. So the insurance should be preceded by that, and I think it's about time that we pull all of the assessment efforts together. The management measure should always come last. Earthquake, for example, how do we prepare for it? We do earthquake drills. That to me is not very useful unless we have a good communication system in place, and unless we have already assessed what we have above the ground, below the ground, we can have a pipeline that could burst, no? And again, that also applies to the insurance. I wish Secretary Purisima is here, but we will try to communicate that to them, and I hope that the three organizations behind this effort will help put together the implementation of this kind of model that puts all of these three things together. Communication, I think, is the first very important step that should be there all the time.
Good morning, everyone. I am Undersecretary Yanko of the Department of Social Welfare and Development. One of the key messages of our resource persons is that we must manage the future. I would like to share the steps of the Department of Social Welfare in helping manage the future, particularly the poverty reduction efforts. Our conditional cash transfer program has conditions for the poor to follow in exchange for the grants, and I'm happy to share that we have incorporated a family development session attendance as one of the conditions. And one of the modules of our family development session is family and community disaster preparedness. We are teaching the family how to adapt to the barangay situation, but we also teach the barangay on what are the hazards and how do they adapt to the hazards. Second, we have also mitigation programs. Our core shelter project is a winner of the World Habitat Award because the shelter that we construct for the poor can withstand a wind velocity of 180 kilometers per hour. And we have proven that in the many disasters that have visited the country, the habitats that we have constructed have weathered the typhoons. So I just want to share good news.
Thank you very much. So we have three more in the list. Maybe we could allow our speakers to respond. The first question is to the World Bank on the need to assess for assessment and good communication before insurance.
It's not really a question, it's a recommendation for us. I think in the end it is up to the authorities, the government, to really make that comprehensive planning, if you want. But I do agree with you that in a way the Philippines misses out on opportunities because of their deficiencies in this risk management and risk financing, which makes private efforts to get their insurance against earthquakes or against flooding will become far more expensive if there's not an integrated risk management framework. So I fully agree with you. How to get there? The World Bank is only a minor player, but we will continue to interact with the government on this. We actually particularly focus on disaster risk financing, as Secretary Purisima said, but mainly for now, actually, the post-disaster, which is a little sad. It's in the recovery, and we're looking at a contingent line of credit so that the government has quickly money available to fund reconstruction, which is lacking at the moment in part because of the budgetary system. Contingencies in this country have to be funded before you can actually spend it. So we can do a little bit, we can contribute a little bit there. But what there is also very, very big potential in our view in the prevention and the financing of prevention. One of the tools that we're actually looking at and that we've been discussing with the government, that does not concern yet the private sector but local governments, to try and pool all the calamity fund and basically make that a contingency fund insurance, and that could then potentially be topped up again by a contingent line of credit. So that would be a more creative use of that funding. And then if you can become a member of such a club, if you indeed have done your homework as a local government, if you've done the preventive measures that it takes in your locality, that would make your citizens more safe. So those are the type of incentives. I mean, I do agree with my colleague, of course, that a lot of it has to do with better planning, a lot of it has to do with more enforcement of the building codes. But frankly, we all seem to be human, and we don't seem to be able to actually do that. So to provide the financial incentives and for actually doing the right thing may be one way to go, specifically for local governments.
Senator, we're at 11:30. I still have 3 people on the list, so should we continue?
What we do is that we segue to the press con already. Is the press con in the same room?
Yes.
After the 3 questions, thank you. Yes, after the 3 questions, I think Tony Loizada of the MO has 1 question, and then we can have the 2 others. Then we can proceed with the press conference, assuming the media are here. Then we adjourn by 11:45.
Yes, so I have in my list Loren Legarda from Albany, and then Red Constantino, and the congressman from the front. So these are the people in the list. So maybe we could start by, yeah, maybe, Congressman.
Good morning, Madam Senator, resource person. Actually, I'm the chairman of the small committee in Congress, Reforestation Committee, and I saw the slide, that the first slide is regarding the forest, with forest and without forest. But unfortunately, I don't think we have a DNR representative here. Meron bang taga-DNR? Anyway, the senator mentioned a while ago several department with the relation to this topic today, but I did not hear any mention about DNR.
Oh, that's impossible. They're in the middle. Maybe I did not mention them, but of course they should be there at the center of it all.
Anyway, ma'am, I'm just concerned about the budget of DNR. Our reforestation project is 1.2 billion for 2011. That will cover around 20,000+ hectares of forest land. But according to DNR, we need to reforest 8 million hectares of forest. That's why, considering mitigation of this disaster, the reforestation is the most basic and I believe easiest way to do it. And then I even went to Tanay this last Monday and inspected the Marikina watershed site. It's supposed to be a protected areas, but the area is very empty. So although we are discussing about climate change here, but the people in Upland don't understand this climate change. They need to feed their stomach first. So I'm glad that the government has this program of reforestation that's give them some compensation to reforest a certain per hectare basis. But hopefully that by 2011 with the secretary here from NEDA and the climate change commissioner here, we should increase the reforestation program, because 8 million hectares, if we divide it at 30,000 per hectare a year, I don't think we need, we can still, we have to need 200 more years to reforest to completely reforest our protected areas. So hopefully our advisor here to the president can advise him, and then any maybe a resource person have some legislative recommendation to our committee, we will be glad to accept it. Thank you.
Thank you, Congressman Victor Yu. Actually, what we need now is more than legislation. As you're correct in saying, you're Congressman, you know the needs on the ground. Of the 8 million hectares of marginal unutilized land, sabi mo na 1 million lang ang ating gamitin. So 1 million hectares na yan, which a DENR can identify, if we give away, give in quotation marks, 1 hectare to every farmer family and go into agroforestry. I don't know if my experts in economics would agree, because it is good for the environment, it's also good for the stomach and the pocket. 1 million hectares, 1 hectare per family, then we have 1 million jobs in agriculture, then you feed the people and protect the environment. I don't think that takes a rocket scientist to agree that if we promote agroforestry and then plant vegetables, whatever is attuned to the environment in that region for their daily sustenance, that's where the DA can come in, that's where the DNR can come in, and perhaps the World Agroforestry Center based in Los Baños, Dr. Rodelasco, one of the IPCCs, and they can help us, and the World Bank can help fund it without much consultancy cost. Okay? So, so what I'm saying is that there's a solution to every problem. The much vaunted 1 million jobs in agriculture is available. We just need to do it. Now, maganda kaya nga ang output ng konferensyang ito ay kakagawa tayo ng multi-partisan, multi-sectoral, active, working government and NGO workers, maliit lang na grupo, and we will make sure the medium-term development plan is based on redefining development, on sustainable development, on disaster resiliency and climate proofing and disaster proofing our budget, which translates to operationalization of every department on the ground. Yes. Funding, ayan sila. We allow you to lecture as long as you will fund.
In addition to that, in addition to that, Madam Senator, I think the other key message really is that the reforestation requirements for the 8.4 million denuded forests does not have to be done, and really cannot be done by government alone. In addition to the agroforestry, there are areas that are good for production and can actually be given out for not just big plantation development, but for tree farmers and other CBFM and anybody who is willing to take it on. In addition to that, we have also real best practices of even local governments who have seen value to protecting their own watersheds. I want to cite Puerto Princesa, for example, who has completely reforested their own watershed by themselves with the support of the people, which has now become the annual Pista sa Kagubatan. And there are mechanisms to fund this. We have a city, San Carlos City, Negros, where for every cubic meter of water that you use, there is a fee attached for the watershed rehabilitation, because you need to ensure that you have the source. If you want to ensure that you have water, you have to make sure that you protect the source of your water. And if that needs rehabilitation, you have to invest in that. In like manner, for Metro Manila, Manila Water needs to protect, and they are very active in the protection, and they're in fact funding the preparation of the overall management plan for the Marikina watershed. So sama-sama talaga tayong lahat, no, in undertaking this activity. Ang importante lang, I also really want to stress this, is maybe not for the plantations which are for production purposes, but for the rest, especially the watersheds, we really have to make sure that we plant indigenous species. Ibalik ho natin yung natural na forest ng Pilipinas. Kasi hindi lang huyang puno, may mga iba pang flora and fauna who also thrive there.
I really appreciate the suggestion of Senator Legarda on the sustainability and the income generation, because that is really one of the key issues in this forestry. People will continue to deforest if they have to make the money out of it. So actually empowering the poor people, it sounds really exciting. On the funding side, there were actually various global funding sources starting to become available for this, and I just would like to encourage the Philippines to if you want to get ready and set up for this, because both the RED initiative, the so-called RED initiative, is now starting to take off, and reforestation, of course, makes perfect sense as a carbon capture as well as an adaptation measure. So it is a win-win if you want, but there will be money available for that. We've been working with the PDRF, the Philippine Post-Disaster Foundation, the private sector foundation, and I see Klaas here. We actually submitted the Philippines submitted a proposal, which was going to be a privately managed effort to the so-called Climate Investment Fund. Well, they're on the reserve list. They're not yet quite there, but we actually believe that we can be quite hopeful that at some point that funding will become available at no consultation cost.
Okay, that's on record. Very good. I will look at the breakdown of the costs. Very good. Okay, Long.
Yeah, good noon. I'm Long Regas from Albay province. So my governor is Joey Sabti Salceda. So everybody knows that Albay is the Vatican of disaster, but a capital of adaptation. we respond to climate change start with education, and DRR start with adaptation start with DRR. So my question is, the development of Alba is very simple. We make MDG a goal, adaptation follows. We ordain policies from national and local policies. We execute the practice programs, and we make institutions. That's why we have CIRT and APSEMO. And right now we have the Climate Change Academy of Albay for the LGUs. That is an output of the joint program MDGF Achievement Fund of the 1656. So the question is, how do we get grant or avail, or is there any plan to incentivize LGUs that invest this DRR and CCA?
Maybe we could take the last question from Rick Constantino.
Who would like to answer that? The World Bank or NEDA? How do you provide incentives to LGUs who are into DRR and CCA?
Well, I can give you some international experience. I mentioned before that the one area where we see possibilities for the Philippines is to actually pool the contingency funds of local government in sort of an insurance arrangement, and that would incentivize the local governments to prepare better. So Albay is already there, but other local governments would also need to then, if you want, step up. The other possibility, if indeed it were to be the government's, the central government's priority, the president's priority, what could be done is to give an earmark transfer to local governments to do certain adaptation measures. In other countries that has been done, in many other policy areas, not just this. But this could be one means by which the central government can incentivize local governments to do the right things. Basically an earmark transfer. Some money to do the right thing. Seems to make sense.
Thanks.
Senator, I can also maybe just quickly respond to it, because under the Climate Change Act and the amendment proposed by Senator Enrile on the Survival Fund, there will be funds available on top of their regular budgets for local governments. And one thing being considered by the Climate Change Commission is to distribute this based on performance. So the question is, how is this performance going to be measured? So I think this, if LGUs who are willing and able to undertake these activities would probably get more financing.
We have last 3 questions. We have Tony Loizaga, then Red, and Congressman Dan. The others, you can perhaps furnish your questions. I'm sorry. Then the media can ask questions if you still have questions apart from these.
I have a question about the risk rubric that is being propagated, I guess, asserted in the book. There is an equation that growth is not equal to welfare. So what is the metric for welfare? And I think that must be linked to this whole mapping issue. We're looking at spatial patterns of hazards, but who's mapping vulnerability? And how do you define vulnerability at the different scales at which we have to work, all the way down to the local government?
Yeah, thank you. That's a very good and pointed question. The various different metrics for welfare, and the UN, for example, comes out with the HDI, the Human Development Indicators, and that's probably the best known global metric. And other countries have come up with their own specific metrics as well. And because it's a bit difficult to come up with sort of globalized, homogenized metrics. In fact, as a digression, the French government recently undertook a massive exercise coming up with the development of a metric for happiness, and because that's also directly linked to welfare. So the point is it's difficult, but there are efforts out there, and I'd be more than happy to go into more details later. Regarding your second question was on vulnerability. The disaster community has gone overboard, I think, in trying to define these terms. I think intuitively we all understand what these terms mean: risk, vulnerability, exposure, and there are formal definitions out there. But in the book, we've taken great pains to minimize technical jargon as such, and to really appeal to how a common man would understand these terms. So that's all I have to say about that.
Red?
Maraming salamat po, Senator. My question is actually for Secretary Padilla. But before that, I'd like to thank the World Bank for sharing this piece of work. It's utterly compelling, and you can rest assured that we will try to help in getting this piece of work become central to government's formulation of development strategies. The Senate President, as was earlier announced, had filed the People's Survival Fund bill. I have it on first hand from Luzon to Mindanao, from local governments, Surigao, Nueva the Mountain Province, Negros Occidental. They're looking at this measure as their measure. The local governments are hoping for early passage of the bill. In fact, in the House, under the leadership of Congressman Fernandez and Deputy Speaker Tañada, there are already 60 co-authors po. And in the Senate, obviously, under the helm of Senator Legarda, it's going to go forward.
We'll pass it before March 25, the end. You know how I work here in the Senate. Yes, so we will pass it. We've had, how many hearings have we had? One, and we've one TWG. And then committee report will be ready by March, okay? And we have deadlines. We hope to pass it in the Senate before March 25, and when we resume by May 8, we have to do the BICAM, and then before we adjourn on June 10, it has to be a law.
That's great po. And that deserves applause po.
In the original climate change law,
I know po exactly.
It was there. I will not name the senator who asked for the amendment to take it out because it was, never mind, it was a funding mechanism. So we talked and he said, kaysa naman maitsepwera yung Climate Change Act because of that amendment to have an adaptation fund ang pangalan nun, sige na. Tapos i-amendment na lang. So I'm glad that JPE, the Senate President, filed the People's Survival Fund. That was the central portion of the adaptation fund. Bringing it back. So,
yung response po kasi, kaya po tatanong sana, the reason why I wanted to ask Secretary Padilla is that there is also understandably a concern from the economic managers that the sources from where the PSF will be getting its money from will go against the fiscal management objectives of the government. But as the presentation here had already said again and again, and as Senator Legarda had described it brilliantly, this should be considered as an investment into the future because it makes local economies more resilient, and prevention really pays. So, a few words po sana, Secretary Padilla. There may be concerns on details, but would the NEDA proactively make sure that it actually becomes a priority legislation? Local governments really need it, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Actually, if you think about it, it's really, if it's properly structured, it's like an insurance fund. What you don't want in something like this is to have what's known as free riding. Alam mo, pag libre lahat yan, lahat ay gustong may kailangan. It's just like, parang naman ng pamilya yan. What you would want is for maybe a nice feature is to have the local governments who want to be part of this to also put in a little bit of their money. Yeah. Think of it as a matching grant, with some coming from the government. And then, and then if you can grade risks, then those with high risk will have a higher rate of contribution. You might actually already start enforcing parang natural behavior na nila yon, na they will start enforcing their own risk reduction in their own places para bumagsak yung contribution share nila. If you can put those kinds of features, you can actually come up with a very nice law.
Actually, the concern of Red is, since this is one pie, and we give the budget to different departments, if we put in the People's Survival Fund and we enact it into law, it might end up to be an unfunded law because government will say we don't have the funds for that. What he's saying, and that is what we know all about, and I just wanted to put it on record, it is not a cost, it is not an additional cost, it is an investment to prevent bigger costs that will set us back in the future because of disasters which we cannot avoid, 20 typhoons a year, earthquakes which will happen, volcanic eruptions which will happen, etc., etc. And so we should consider it as part of the pie. Meaning when we give the funds to DA, to DNR, to DepEd, to DOH, naka-incorporate na yung funds for adaptation for LGUs because that is it. It's not an over and above cost na pwedeng kontra. Walang pondo hindi pwedeng pondohan, hindi. Integrated na yun, di ba Red? Yun ang ibig na sabihin. Kaya kailangan talaga kakampi ang NEDA. Kakampi naman natin, naintindihan nila at tutulungan tayo. Kaya nga, kasama kayo dapat dun sa multi-sectoral meeting that we will have regularly to be able to craft that MTPDP, which is disaster resilient climate proof, hanggang sa implementation, we will monitor that. Okay, thank you. One last from Dan, please. Thank you.
Good afternoon to all of us. Good afternoon, Senator Loren Legarda. Thank you so much for inviting us over to be enlightened to a lot of things. A while ago, you have mentioned about the problem of Laguna Lake, wherein the typhoon Ondoy and Pepeng have really devastated not only the province of Laguna, but the province of Rizal as well, and at the same time, the part of Metro Manila. The previous administration have approved a contract with the Baguio Work and the Cloth and Sewing. And I am directing this question to Secretary Padiranga. We have seek an audience with the President last 3 months ago, the different congressmen of the province of Rizal and the province of Laguna. And as a matter of fact, the good secretary was there, and the different secretaries concerned were also there. The President have told us that the project will be cancelled, and it is very unfortunate to the province of Laguna and Rizal. But we also respect the wisdom of the President, and the President have promised us that a project will be alternative project will be implemented. My question is, do we have already firstly, Secretary, the contract with the Baguio Work and the Cloth and Sewing was really cancelled. It's kung na-cancel na po yung project with the Belgian company. And if the project was cancelled, what alternative project will be implemented in the Laguna Lake? And at the same time, what institution or financial institution is involved in this project that will be implemented in Laguna Lake?
Thank you very much, Congressman. Sa akin wala na dito si Secretary Purisimo because that's really his area, talking to the financiers. Ang pagkakaalam ko doon, mayroon na yatang notice of cancellation na pinadala yung DNR. Pero ang isip po naman namin doon, we will essentially, the objective of the project, we would like to revive. Kasi ang plano din noon doon, dadagdagan na yung gustong gawin ng dredging at dadagdagan ng watershed protection doon sa itaas, including disaster mitigation even in the lowlands. Hindi po yun, unfortunately, we don't have the expertise for that. We depend on the ENR. We're actually hoping that the ENR will already be able to start working on putting that project together, which will have several components. Nakasama po yung disaster mitigation, as well as the dredging part in order to deepen the lake. Kasama na rin po yun. In the meantime, ang napag-usapan naman natin doon, yung isang project na already waiting in the wings ay habaan, magkakaroon ng circumferential road na makakatulong din in the meantime habang pinaplano yung mas malawakan po na approach doon sa siltation at saka erosion on the into Laguna Lake. Okay, so yun po ang ano, kung gusto po ninyo, i-check po kay Secretary Bahay kung nasaan na po yung planning side. No?
Alright. Anyway, I conducted an investigation last Monday with we have invited the other party, the BTC, but unfortunately they're saying to us in the committee that they haven't received any notice of cancellation yet. And I heard from the palace that there's some project that being implemented. There's a board resolution coming from the NEDA that have been approved already by your office that something like LISCO project were approved, and a soap loan will be given to the different LGUs in the provinces, and the financial aspect of this will come from the World Bank. So can you kindly confirm to this representation if this is true?
That's true, Congressman.
So meaning there is already an alternative project that will be implemented, and it will entail the financial aspect coming from the World Bank.
Actually, continuation po yun. Mayroon ng LISCO.
But I believe that the LISCO project is so divergent that they are dealing with a lot of like reforestation, dredging, something like that.
Po, most of it is in water treatment at saka solid waste disposal. Apat po ang major framework noon, pero nandun po sa LGU's banda, diretso yan. It's the lowland part of that overall na mas malaki project.
So the financial aspect will go directly to the different LGUs. Is that what you say?
Dadaan po doon, pero grants po yun, bibigay yata sa sa mga LGUs. Because hindi ko alam kung mayroong matching part.
Maybe, Mr. Secretary, we will have just another meeting with us also with the different congressmen for us to be knowledgeable also, because we are at bay right now. Because people are asking what we are doing in the Laguna Lake, because rainy season will come again and the problem will arise again. So ano po yung ginagawa namin? So we are being put into the middle of a situation that we are at loss. So somehow we are begging that somehow have an audience with us, especially the Laguna and Rizal Province, for us to be enlightened and for us to tell the people of Laguna that this is the project of the government. Thank you so much, Madam.
We'll take care of that, Congressman. We will inform the members of Congress who are affected.
Thank you very much. For those who have questions, Victoria, my staff, please give it to the Climate Change Committee, and we will ask the relevant agencies or the World Bank to answer you. Give us your contact email addresses. We will have to adjourn. It's almost noontime. Is the media ready for the press conference? No more questions from the media. No more questions. So here for giving us, I think, a valuable information and insights, which is just the beginning of the starting point, Secretary, of what we're going to do. Thank you very much.
Huwag tayo minsan tumutok, meron tayo konti para latang na. Ayusin natin. Alam din natin maayos ilaw para okay yung ilaw. Hindi pa.
Yatit.
So, okay lahat, basta tayo papormin natin.
Thank Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Dapat dating recommendation pasok mo sa kanya para budget, diba?
Kung ano, diba? Tapos kung sino communicate, sino ba?
Dito naman siya.
By all means, if you have some questions, can I email you here? So I have a lot of questions with regard to this. By all means. Fine. Thank you.
Taga-tungon lang ako, taga-naga. Sige. Very good. Oo. Para i-introduce ako naman taga-tingin sa at sa budget hearing for 2012. Kailangan bago mag-impisa yung budget nila. Diba? Dapat nagma sa ating vision. Diba? Sige. Tayong taga-tingin, taga-naga. Ito nang meron na. Yes. I helped him with Pinoya. I met with him last week. Oh, for a different thing, I gave him a letter of Suchi. Huwag mo i-tape. Sige, sir. Thank you so much. Salamat. Okay, very good. You want to share now? Sige. Yes! I know. Saan tayo nun? Zero plastics, ha? Zero plastics. Did you find the zero plastic?
Some companies. But that is
5 billion.
2 years ago, nag-privilege na ako dyan.
Maayos pa magkaroon ng alternatibong proyekto. Para na sa
magtatrabaho sa DOH para sa
atin.
Ready face the camera. No.
Okay, thank you. Hindi maganda. Okay.
This is your spare copies, your personal I have here.
For the office. Can I give money? Of course. For you. Yeah. And this is for the bank. Victoria, ha?
There's one here for...
Pare-pareho to, no?
Yeah, these are...
For home.
To sort out.
Thank you, ah. Thank you.
Quick question. The report said that... Ay, ano ba? GMA News Online po.
Ah, okay.
Yeah. The book...
You get our PRs, ma?
Yeah. Okay. The report said that political stability, the stability of political parties affects the mortality, disaster mortality rate. How do you see this principle at play in the Philippines?
Because climate change and disasters have become a national security challenge. It's in fact the biggest human development challenge of all times, and therefore it affects everything, whether it's political stability and security, hunger and starvation. It affects everything. It's not just climate change, a scientific phenomenon. It brings about hunger, loss of lives, and therefore it could cause political instability.
Mm-hmm. What about the political? It recommends something about strengthening political parties.
No, in the World Bank presentation.
Yeah. In the report. I asked the lead author about it, and he said that political parties, strong political parties, are more accountable to the public.
Ah, yes. Okay.
In terms of disaster mitigation.
Good governance would lead to better management of our resources, and therefore if we have a strong political system that is accountable to the people, then we can have more transparency and accountability in the disbursement of our resources for disaster risk reduction and climate adaptation.
Mm-hmm. In your concrete experience, there been a bill or whatever that has been stalled or countered because of political bickering? A bill about disaster risk reduction?
No, I think Congress has been, I'm fortunate to have had the support to be able to pass the DREAM law, the Disaster Risk Reduction Management Act, as well as the Climate Change Law. Of course, it takes time because the whole legislative process is tedious, but we were able to enact it into law.
All right,
yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Excuse me.
Thank you. Okay, we work together, huh? Someone you know, a friend, takes his own life. I mean, when a person passes away, it's sad enough. A strong man takes his own life, and if it's in the course of his work or investigation, so it's very, very sad.
Fun memory.
It's happened for him. He worked with the wife. I don't know what well, but he, kasi ano yan eh, nag-DNR yan, nag-energy yan. I talked to him last year. Harvard Club yan eh, presidente ng Harvard Club.
Ma'am, kailangan ko mag-hinahina yung mga senador sa pagkakaroon nila?
The word is not hinay. Whether there's death or not, we should do our job based on factual evidence with the sole objective of investigating in aid of legislation, literally, that ganon, not to besmirch or malign and started with or without the death. The committee, multi-sectoral committee led by the NETA and the DOF, which I will also be part of, to make sure that the medium-term development plan is climate-proof, disaster resilient, and sustainable development.
What World Bank funding for which?
There's a lot of funding available, we just have to access it.
Ballpark figure?
No idea, no idea. They just said there's funding available, so they said without consultancy.
From where will they get that?
From their funds, for DRR, for LGUs. So World Bank funding will be made available for LGUs who will engage in DRR projects, disaster risk reduction.
This is not existing, this is new funding.
No, I think existing, we just need to access it and compare with it.
Depende sa size ng projects yun.
Yes.
So walang limit?
I'm sure there's a limit to the resources. May limit yun. At least we will be guided as to what the process is. And they agree that DRR should be a priority.
They committed to release this funding starting.
It's just a lecture on the book that they did. So in fact, I'm meeting of the minds on the need for disaster resiliency in development projects. Now I asked them about funding, because there's funding that could be accessed. Now how do we go about it? That's where the NETA can help us.
Yung immediate access, di ba? Dahil kailangan na yun na talaga inflation.
Yeah, it will take time. Admittedly, it will take time.
We just need to identify which
NETA will have to help us in accessing it. Not the Senate, but help us with the LGUs.
Ito, issue Padilla sa yung people's fund.
Yes, because that was part of the original law, climate change, and now we had one in the WG and one hearing about that, and it's a good thing that we will prioritize it. It will be part of the climate change. It's an amendment, so that we will have a survival fund for local government projects, especially those involving water. Back to I don't want to comment on that kasi DFA because they deported them to ROC in China. So maybe so as not to add fuel to the tension of the foreign relations chair. DFA. Well, they said that they would have to screen the 80,000 views. So we have sobriety in the wake of this perceived tension. I'm sure that the DFA will be able to explain their part, and there will be amicable settlement.
So walang hearing?
No, I don't want to I'm not a controversial chair for the issue. No, kasi tayo, may mga chair. So we just got caught in the I'm not sure about that.
Pero parang hinahanap talaga yung mga
that the DFA answered that because it was their move to do that to the board.